My heart almost stopped that day.
The church bell still rang, the flowers were still fragrant, and everyone awaited the happiest moment of my life. But the groom, my son, never walked through the door. The bride wept before the altar, and the whispers echoed like daggers. He ran away. He ran away, and not alone. He took the maid, whom I treated like a daughter, and along with it, he took my entire inheritance, robbing me not only of my future, but also of my dignity. In that moment, I realized that life hadn't just betrayed me. It had stripped me bare in front of everyone, leaving me with a question that resonates to this day. How can a son turn his back on his own mother? I always say I was shaped by the gentle fire of responsibility. While other girls dreamed of flowing dresses and love letters, I learned to hang out laundry, measure salt with my fingertips, and listen to the sizzle of beans as if deciphering a secret. When my son arrived, with the delicate cry of a bird fresh from its nest, I felt the world finally had a place for me. There, in the grip of my calloused hand, I promised, "You'll have everything I never had." And lo and behold, I believed it wholeheartedly. I grew up with time chasing me, and I chasing time, but I never let the basics go unnoticed. A bed smelling of sunshine, coffee brewing slowly, a notebook with flaps open. I took pride in my simple routine, in that invisible clock only a mother knows. Sometimes, at the end of the day, I would sit on the threshold and gaze at the sky fading like old fabric, thinking about his future. I imagined him in a suit, serious, with steady hands and a sweet heart. "Good boy," I repeated like a prayer. He, a mischievous man from an early age, had a way of tilting his head when he apologized that would tear me apart. "Mom, I didn't mean to." And I laughed, pretending not to see the sock full of coins disappearing, the ball breaking the window, the overdue homework. But deep down I saw it. I saw it and chose the path of patience, because a mother's love is a double-edged sword. It cuts us to protect the child. And I was proud of that cut, like someone with a battle scar. I remember the smell of sharpened pencils in the makeshift study kitchen, the radio blaring, playing oldies, and him, tongue between his teeth, copying multiplication tables into his notebook. 10 times 10, Mom? 100, my son. He blinked, satisfied, and I felt a soft warmth spread through my chest. It was that small happiness, those little things that adults overlook, but for us become a string of remembered pearls. Over time, the boy grew, and with me, my pride grew. First job, neatly ironed shirt, shoes shined until the sky shone. I took mental photos of each achievement. I even talked to the pots while stirring the broth. "Our boy is coming, see?" The pots responded with their bubbling, accomplices of my hope. And I, foolish, believed that life, when we do good, gives back in kind. In the neighborhood, many people said, "Raising a child alone is for the few." And I smiled, not out of arrogance, God forbid, but because I knew the path I'd trod, the scraped knees of my soul. I was proud of my uprightness, of paying my bills on time, of not owing any favors that would weigh me down at night. I taught my son that a clean name is a soft pillow. He nodded, eyes attentive, like someone carving in stone. And I thought everything was fine, that the lesson had sunk in. Sometimes, on Sundays, we'd go to the market just to walk around. The smell of peeled oranges, the shouts of the vendors, the sound of bags rustling. I'd buy 2 pastries, half for each, and some sugarcane juice to share. "Mom, when I get rich, you won't cook anymore." I'd laugh, patting him on the shoulder. "I wouldn't be without my pots if I died." He'd laugh along, and the world seemed so simple, so round, so ours. My pride tasted like warm bread. It had the sound of a silly laugh, the kind you hear at the end of the afternoon. I adjusted the collar of his shirt as if straightening out fate. "God bless you, my son." And he said, "Amen, Mom." A faint wave of emotion hung in the air, something indescribable. You just feel it. And I felt it. I felt it and kept it, like a note folded in my bra, close to my heart. There were tough days, of course there were. My dignity sometimes came out like wet clothes in the rain. I twisted, hung, and pretended it was just a gale. Still, I never lost faith in my ant-like work. Brick by brick, I built the house, his studies, his character, at least I thought so. Pride served as my blanket on cold nights, and I slept convinced I was on track. And if I close my eyes now, I can almost hear him turning the door key, returning from the street. "I'm home, Mom." It was music. I answered from the stove. "Bring your plate." And in that simple exchange, I saw the world unfolding as it should. I trusted. I celebrated. I told myself, "You won." Little did I know that, up ahead, there was a dark corner waiting for me with a great fright, the kind that changes the name of pride and becomes something else, something that, back then, I wouldn't have dared to name. I always imagined his marriage would be the culmination of my struggle. I saw, in the bride, the promise of continuity, as if everything I'd carried on my shoulders for years was finally being placed in safe hands. Our first family dinner with her was filled with shy glances, but also with hopeful smiles. "Donna Maria, your son is a wonderful man." I heard it like music. With each word she spoke, I felt the future unfolding like flowers. I remember the feeling of seeing them holding hands across the room, their fingers intertwined, firm, as if they knew what they wanted. I breathed deeply, relieved, as if I could rest my weary soul. "He chose well," I repeated to myself. There was an air of dignity about her that reminded me of the strong women who came before me. It was as if life, generously, had gifted me with a daughter I never had. Hope made me dream big. I imagined grandchildren running around the yard, Christmas parties filled with voices, a lavish table, and the smell of roast pork filling every corner of the house. I could already see myself teaching my daughter the pudding recipe I'd inherited from my mother. "It's a secret, okay? Only pass it on when you feel the time has come." And I smiled, anticipating that future that seemed so certain, so within reach. There was no shortage of comments around the neighborhood. "Your son hit the nail on the head," they'd say. I swelled with pride. After all, in every approving look, there was a reflection of my struggle. I thought, I didn't raise this alone in vain. Here's living proof. Sometimes, when the bride came to visit, I'd watch her fix her hair, straighten her skirt, as if it were a spectacle just for me. Every detail confirmed it. My family was growing, and growing well. One Sunday afternoon, we all sat at the table. He, with that slightly serious manner he had when he wanted to please, served her carefully. "Would you like more rice, love?" She laughed, the sound light as a church bell. I, with my plate full, felt my heart overflow. It was as if, for an instant, all the weight of life had dissolved in the steam of home-cooked food. Hope materialized there before my eyes. As the wedding preparations began, my heart filled with an almost childlike joy. Bridal magazines were scattered around the room, floral catalogs, and scraps of fabric to choose the dress. I ran my fingers over each sample as if touching the future. My heart beat faster, like in the days when life still allowed me to dream without fear. And silently, I thanked God for finally seeing my journey rewarded. There were nights I lay awake, imagining the ceremony, her veil fluttering in the wind, his gaze fixed, filled with emotion. I pictured myself in the front pew, wiping away tears with a lace handkerchief I'd saved just for the occasion. "It's going to be the happiest day of my life," I'd say softly, almost like a prayer. Hope lulled me like a late-night lullaby. Even the neighbors noticed my joy. "You look radiant, Donna Maria." I laughed, unable to hide it. At the market, at the bakery, at church, I was the mother of the groom, and that had a sweet weight, a glow that made me proud. After all, how many times had fate seemed to deny me joy? And now, finally, I was about to witness the blossoming of what I'd always dreamed of. Deep down, I believed that this wedding wasn't just theirs, it was mine too. It was the harvest of my entire life, the seal that I had won the battle of raising a child alone, of enduring the pain, of holding my head high. My son will have the family I never had. That phrase stayed with me day and night, like a song we can't stop singing. But today, remembering with a heavy heart, I realize how treacherous hope can be. It lulls us to sleep, makes us believe the worst is over. Little did I know that, as I was embroidering dreams for the future, life was preparing an unexpected tear in the fabric of my story, a tear I didn't yet have eyes to see. The days leading up to the wedding were a mix of euphoria and exhaustion. The house was always full of people, relatives who only showed up on special occasions, curious neighbors, friends who came to offer help. The phone rang nonstop, orders arrived, budgets were being reviewed. I felt like I was in the eye of a hurricane, but a happy hurricane, the kind that drags us into a dream. Even the smell of hot glue from the party favors seemed to intoxicate me. I remember the first time we went to see the ballroom. The space was vast, with immense chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, like stars trapped just to shine that night. I touched one of the golden chairs and felt a pang in my chest. This is where my son will become a husband. The bride, enchanted, twirled around the room, imagining every detail. I watched from afar, thinking, my God, how can life be generous after testing me so much? In the bedroom, the chaos was different. Open boxes, dresses hanging, fabrics scattered about. The blue dress I'd chosen rested on the bed, waiting for the big day. I ran my hand over the soft fabric, almost as if caressing a memory. This is my gift to myself, I thought. After all, I, too, deserve to shine, to be seen, to be remembered in this moment that crowned not only their love, but my struggle. The afternoons were filled with endless tastings. Cakes of various flavors, sweets lined up in rows, glasses raised to sample wines I'd never heard of. With each bite, the bride would ask me, "So, did you like this one?" I smiled, trying to be modern, but inside I just wanted a good old cornmeal cake with filtered coffee. Still, I kept my opinion to myself because that was their dream, and I only wanted to add to it, never get in the way. The rehearsal at the church was a whole different story. The echo of footsteps on the cold floor, the organist testing the first chords, the bride adjusting her makeshift veil, the smiling priest. I, sitting in the front pew, could barely hold back tears. My son, completely absorbed, repeated the lines, a little nervous, but with a sparkle in his eyes that made me believe everything. It was as if the scene were already real, and I could already feel my heart racing, as if it were the official day. The neighbors, of course, didn't miss a chance to chime in. "Look, Donna Maria, this flower is bad luck in marriage. The color of the towels doesn't match the season." I smiled and pretended to listen, but deep down I was already deaf to any negativity. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could dim the sparkle I saw in the couple's eyes. I convinced myself, this time, life won't play tricks on me. Little did I know how wrong I was. Sometimes, in the midst of the rush, I'd stop in the kitchen and take a deep breath. The smell of onions frying, the sound of the pressure cooker, the clock ticking away, hours that seemed to fly by. And suddenly, I'd remember when he was little, studying at the table among the pots and pans, asking for help with his homework. That same boy was now practicing his groom steps, and the memory filled me with such deep pride it hurt. The photo album began to be assembled even before the wedding. Photo shoots, practice smiles, poses in front of the garden. I watched it all with a heavy heart, remembering my own old photos, already yellowed with age. I wondered, will he one day look at these images and remember me, the mother who was always there behind the scenes? This question lingered unanswered within me. The nights were sleepless. My head was full of lists, flowers, souvenirs, clothes, transportation for the guests. I wrote everything down in a worn notebook, like someone trying to control the uncontrollable. And in the quietest hours, I ask myself, does he realize all the love I put into every detail? Sometimes I long to hear a simple "thank you, Mom." But I settled for silence, believing gratitude would come in other forms. And so, amid the scent of fresh flowers, rehearsed music, and colorful ribbons, I felt like I was experiencing a prelude to happiness. It was like walking down a lighted corridor, believing that at the end lay a golden door. Only, hidden in the shadows of that very corridor, a crack was already forming, and I didn't yet know that that joy was balanced on treacherous ground, ready to crumble. Amidst all the hustle and bustle and excitement, small signs began to emerge that I stubbornly ignored. The first was a sidelong glance I caught, my son and the maid exchanging a strange, too brief complicity, as if it were a secret. I immediately shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. After all, I trusted him. And I trusted her even more, whom I'd always treated like family. One morning, amidst the arriving flowers and the ribbons strewn about the living room, I noticed them both in the kitchen, laughing at some joke I hadn't heard. When I entered, the silence fell heavily, almost deafening. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing, Mom," he said, looking away. And I, foolishly, accepted that curt answer, swallowing the strangeness like someone swallowing a fruit pit. Still, something throbbed inside me, a uneasiness that wouldn't leave me alone. The bride, busy with dress and makeup fittings, didn't seem to understand. And I, who should have been honest, kept quiet. I thought, I won't ruin the brilliance of her dream because of a silly detail. But a mother's heart always understands more than her mouth can say. There was a growing uneasiness within me, as if the walls of the house were beginning to hold secrets I didn't want to hear. One afternoon, I went to retrieve a document from my son's room and caught the scent of women's perfume that wasn't his fiancée's. A sweet, cloying scent, permeating the air. I stopped in the doorway, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes. It must be just me, I tried to believe. But the memory of that scent stayed with me all night, mixed with the sound of pots banging and the whistle of the kettle. The maid, who had previously spoken little, began to take on a silent boldness. Her footsteps echoed differently through the house, firmer, more commanding of the space. I understood this, but I didn't want to admit it, because admitting it meant acknowledging that something was off, that perhaps life was preparing me for a blow I wouldn't have the strength to withstand. Even my son's smile changed. Before, it was wide and transparent. Now it seemed to have a hidden corner, holding secrets I couldn't access. Sometimes, he took longer than usual to come home. "Business, Mom," he'd say. And I, believing it, would lie down praying that it was just that. Work, rushing around, responsibility. But deep down, doubt gnawed at me like a beast hiding in the dark. I began to notice small absences. He'd forget appointments, arrive late to rehearsals, keep the bride waiting. She patiently explained, "He's tired, Donna Maria." I smiled, but inside me echoed a question I didn't have the courage to ask. Tired of what? Tired of whom? It was a heavy silence that tightened my chest every night. The quick conversations between them, the whispers in the backyard, the muffled sound of laughter that stopped as I approached. It was as if the house, once full of hope, began to transform into a stage for disguises. I walked through the rooms feeling the weight of an invisible presence, as if the furniture held testimonies I couldn't hear aloud. I tried to fool myself. I told myself, it's just wedding jitters. It's natural. I repeated that phrase until I believed it. But my heart, that traitor, beat wildly every time I saw them together for more than a moment. A mother's heart doesn't need proof, it feels. And mine was already beginning to sense that something dark was approaching, like a dark cloud about to descend upon my head. And so, amidst the flowers, the ribbons, and the promises of happiness, the first shadow settled in. small, silent, but insistent. A shadow I didn't want to see, because the fear of losing everything I dreamed of was greater than the courage to face the truth. Little did I know that this shadow would grow until it swallowed the entire brightness of my world. The big day dawned with a bright sun, illuminating every corner of the house as if heaven itself had descended to bless the occasion. I woke before everyone else, my heart racing, like a girl on a holiday. I made the most exquisite breakfast of my life, the smell of warm bread and fresh coffee wafting through the kitchen. As I stirred the spoon in the cup, I thought, today my struggle finds meaning. Today my son will become a real man. The hours flew by. The house became a swarming hive of people. Hairdressers, makeup artists, relatives coming and going, clothes hanging on makeshift hangers. The sound of the bride's laughter filled the air with contagious joy. I saw her in the mirror, so radiant she almost looked like an angel. "You look beautiful, my daughter," I said, lightly touching her hand. She smiled, her eyes welling up. That smile gave me hope that all the effort, all the sacrifice had been worth it. Meanwhile, my son was getting ready in the next room. I remember the sound of his new shoes on the hardwood floor, the pop of expensive perfume being sprayed, the tie he insisted on fixing himself. I knocked on the door. "May I come in?" He opened it a little impatiently, but still let me straighten his tie. "It's beautiful, my son. Your fiancé will be thrilled." He just nodded, avoiding my gaze. And I, not wanting to spoil the mood, swallowed my discomfort. The decorated car awaited us. Ribbons fluttered in the wind. Hurried drivers urged everyone to sit down. I, in my carefully chosen blue dress, adjusted the hem so it wouldn't wrinkle. The walk to the church was a whirlwind of thoughts. I remembered the boy running barefoot in the backyard, the rowdy teenager who promised the world, and now I saw him about to walk down the aisle. My heart beat in time with prayer. The church was stunning. The altar was covered in white flowers, the pews adorned with satin bows, the soft sound of the organ preparing the bride's entrance. The guests settled in, whispering among themselves, and I felt the looks of pride and admiration. I sat in the front pew, lace handkerchief in hand, ready to experience the most important moment of my life. It was as if every tear I'd held back over the years was about to pour forth as a blessing. The bride appeared, and silence fell. Her dress shimmered under the light of the stained glass windows, and her every step seemed like a poem. I watched her with my heart aflame, thanking God for giving me the chance to witness such beauty. The guests sighed, some wiped away tears, and I just thought, "May nothing bad happen, Lord." Little did I know that this request was, in a way, a premonition. The groom, however, was slow to appear. The priest adjusted his glasses. The musicians repeated the opening notes. The guests looked at each other doubtfully. With cold hands, I looked toward the sacristy, expecting to see him enter at any moment. "He must be nervous," someone commented. "A groom thing," said another voice. But inside me, my heart was already screaming. Something was wrong. The minutes turned into eternity. The bride, her bouquet trembling in her hands, sought my gaze as if asking for an explanation. I, unresponsive, simply clutched my handkerchief tightly, trying to hide my despair. The hubbub grew in the church, an uncomfortable hum of restless voices. Even the flowers seemed to wilt in his absence. Then the silence was broken by a cruel whisper. "The groom isn't coming." The words spread through the pews like wildfire through dry straw. The pale bride let a tear fall, and I felt the world crumble beneath my feet. My son, the one I'd raised alone, the one I'd carried with such pride, wasn't there. Not before her, not before me, not before anyone. And in that moment, between the beauty of the ceremony and the emptiness of absence, I realized that the shadow that had accompanied me had transformed into complete night. The wedding, which was supposed to be the culmination of my struggle, had become the stage for an unprecedented scandal. And, deep in my heart, A question burned like fire. Where was he? The silence that fell over the church was soul-crushing. First came the timid whispers, as if people still hesitated to believe what was happening. Then a growing hubbub, a sea of muffled voices echoing through the stained glass windows. Sitting in the front pew, I felt my entire body tremble, my hands clenching the handkerchief until it nearly ripped. It was as if the ground had opened up beneath my feet and swallowed me alive. The bride, motionless at the altar, looked like a statue of pain. The bouquet slipped from her trembling fingers, and her gaze desperately searched for some explanation. I stood up, wanting to run to her, hug her, but my legs wouldn't obey. They were heavy as iron. My heart hammered in my chest, asking over and over, "Why? My God, why?" No answer came, only the emptiness of his absence. The priest cleared his throat nervously, trying to maintain his composure. But even his voice trembled when he said, "Let's wait a little longer." A little longer, as if time could restore the dignity that had been ripped away. The guests, some indignant, some curious, whispered among themselves, "How disgraceful. I've never seen anything like it. Poor bride." Each sentence hit me like a rock, and I wanted to cover my ears and disappear. It was then that I saw the bride drop her bouquet, which fell to the floor with a loud crack. She brought her hands to her face and wept, a sob that hurt just to hear. The entire room sighed with her, but no one dared approach. I finally managed to move my legs and went to her. I hugged her tightly, as if she were my own daughter, and whispered, "Strength, my love, strength." But what strength could heal such a gaping wound? People began to rise, some leaving in a hurry, others remaining simply to watch the spectacle of tragedy. It was cruel to see how the pain of others could be turned into entertainment for so many. I felt their gazes burning into my back, as if each one were saying, "Look at that mother who raised her son alone. Her son ran away." Shame crushed me, took my breath away, but I couldn't fall. Not there, not in front of her. The music, which had once lulled me to dreams, now sounded like mockery. The echo of the organ chords, strung out aimlessly, filled the empty church. The flowers, which had seemed so alive, now reminded me of mourning. The beauty of the ceremony had become a scene of tragedy. Lost in the midst of that scene, I could only repeat to myself, "This can't be happening. This can't be true." Some relatives tried to console me, but their words were empty, automatic. "It'll be okay." How could it be? What could be fixed after such humiliation? I looked at the bride, so young, so full of dreams, and felt a weight of guilt that wasn't mine, but that crushed me. As if, by becoming a mother, I had to answer for my own child's sins. The city wouldn't forgive. I could already imagine the conversations on street corners, the invisible headlines being written in the mouths of others. The groom ran away at the altar. He took the family's honor with him. I knew that story would spread like wildfire, and that my name would be in the middle of every sentence, mixed with whispers of pity and contempt. The wound wouldn't be just ours. It would be public. The bride, still in tears, squeezed my hand and said through sobs, "Why did he do this, Dona Maria? Why?" And I, without an answer, just hugged her tighter, crying along with her. Her pain was my pain, and yet there was an extra weight inside me, the feeling that I had lost not only a marriage, but also the son I had raised with such effort. And as everyone left, leaving behind only the scent of wilting flowers and the distant sound of hurried footsteps, I remained there, motionless, staring at the empty altar. My son hadn't come. The wedding hadn't happened. But the scandal, oh, that had just begun, and I already knew it would haunt my name like an eternal shadow. In the days that followed, the silence in the house was louder than any church music. I paced the rooms, trying to understand what had happened, but every corner seemed to bring back only questions. The blue dress still hung on the chair, a cruel reminder of a day that should have been a celebration and turned into shame. The scent of the flowers, now dried, still lingered in the air, mixed with the bitter taste of humiliation that wouldn't leave my mouth. It was one gray morning, while sorting papers on the table, that I found the first clue. Torn envelopes, hidden notes, receipts in the maid's name. My heart raced. I began leafing through each document, my hands trembling, and realized it wasn't carelessness. There was a secret there. My son hadn't just run away, he'd planned it. And he wasn't alone. The truth began to unfold before me like a grotesque painting. Her face appeared on every piece of paper, in every bank record, in every suspicious movement. The maid. The one I'd offered shelter, food, and trust to. The one I'd often sat at the table with, treating like family. It was with her that he'd run away. The betrayal wasn't just her fiancé's, but mine as well, a stab in the back from the one I'd least expected. I suddenly remembered the muffled laughter in the kitchen, the quick glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't seeing. It all made sense. How had I been blind? How had I not noticed? I, who had always prided myself on seeing beyond appearances, on feeling with the heart before the eyes, had deceived myself in my own home. Shame burned inside me like an unquenchable fire. I spent sleepless nights reliving every detail. The maid coming in early, helping arrange the flowers, smiling at me as if she were hiding nothing. My son being late for rehearsals, justifying it with cold excuses. With each memory, a piece fell into place in the puzzle of betrayal. It was like watching a play, where I was the only one unaware of the ending. When I confirmed the news with my neighbors, whispers that traveled faster than the wind, I felt the ground open again. They ran away together, they said. They were seen holding hands at the bus station. Each sentence was a blade. It wasn't just a mother's grief, it was also public shame. The whole town knew. The whole town was talking. And I felt naked before everyone, defenseless, voiceless. I picked up the unfinished photo album, the one that would be a record of a happy marriage. I flipped through the blank pages and cried until I had no more tears. There were no photos to fill those pages. What remained was a broken story, torn out by the roots before it could blossom. And in place of memories, only the holes left by ingratitude. The betrayal was twofold. He, my own flesh and blood, and she, whom I had trusted. Two blows that combined to wound me. I didn't know which hurt more, his absence at the altar or the certainty that he had chosen to run away with another woman. And not just any woman, but someone who had shared my life, who had listened to my confidences, who had been almost like a daughter. I sat in the kitchen, where I had so often served coffee for them both, and felt the house stare back at me, silent, as if to say, "You never really knew your son." That sentence pierced me like a dagger. Had I never known him? Had everything I'd experienced been an illusion, a mask, a well-played role? I, who had sacrificed so much, who dreamed so much, now found myself betrayed in that which was most sacred, trust. And there, amidst scattered papers, dried flowers, and a never-worn blue dress, I understood that the wound wasn't just from being abandoned at the altar. It was the discovery of betrayal. A betrayal that not only took my son away, but also stripped me of the innocence of believing that love alone was enough to keep someone by my side. It didn't take long for the news to spread. In a small town, a secret doesn't last even half a day. His absence from the altar and the bride's tears were enough for every street corner to become a living newspaper. Donna Maria's son ran away. He took the maid with him. Word traveled from mouth to mouth, passing through gates, reaching bakeries, passing over the pharmacy counter. I didn't need radio, television, or newspapers. People took charge of publishing my shame. The next morning, as I left to buy bread, I felt heavy gazes falling on me. Some filled with pity, others with malice. How pitiful for the poor woman. But then, raising a single mother, it turned out this way. Each whispered phrase was a dagger I pretended not to hear. But I did. A mother's heart always listens. I listened and retained it, each word burning like a hot iron. Even those who called themselves friends kept their tongues sharp. "If you need us, we're here," they'd say with a wry smile, but I knew they'd be the first to bring my name up in conversation. There was no consolation. There was only the weight of judgment. The city's walls shrank around me, and I felt trapped by a guilt that wasn't just mine, but that everyone else forced me to carry. The women at church were quick to seek me out. Some tried to comfort me. "It was the enemy's work, my daughter. The devil is cunning." Others, mercilessly, asked in honeyed voices, "Didn't you notice before?" A mother always knows. I swallowed hard, trying not to answer, because deep down that question gnawed at me. Should I have seen it? Had I failed to prevent it? The entire store seemed to be buzzing. At the market, the clerk would lower his eyes when he served me, as if he didn't want to embarrass me, but his mouth was trembling, ready to make a comment. At the pharmacy, I heard two women whispering behind me, "Poor thing, raised alone. Now she's suffering this humiliation."
Poor thing.
That word became my unspoken nickname. More painful than any insult was being reduced to that. Poor thing. Even the sound of the church bell, which had once filled me with peace, now sounded like mockery. Each chime seemed to announce to the world, the wedding didn't happen. I avoided passing by the main square, knowing that there, on the wooden benches, my story had already become a gossip novel. My every move was watched, my every step commented on. The city had become a courtroom, and I was the defendant. At home, the phone rang nonstop. Distant relatives wanted to know details, some out of concern, others out of morbid curiosity. Was it true he ran off with the maid? But what about the fiancée? How did she end up? I'd quickly hang up, tired of repeating the same pain. My voice could no longer bear to narrate the humiliation. It was like ripping open the same wound every day. The cruelest thing was seeing the bride's pain mixed with my own. The poor girl cried in her mother's arms, but still found time to hug me. "It's not your fault, Donna Maria." And even hearing this, I couldn't believe it. Because in people's eyes, the blame always fell on me. I was the mother. I had raised her. And somehow, it seemed everyone expected me to have shaped a different destiny. At night, the neighborhood windows lit up like beacons of judgment. I closed the curtains, but I knew the comments were echoing through the walls. Will they come back? Did they spend all their stolen goods? The people never forgot. They fed on the tragedy as if it were a banquet. And I, powerless, just tried to breathe amidst the suffocation. The town's shock wasn't just that he'd run away from the altar. The bigger scandal was his choice, exchanging the promise of an honorable future for adventure with a woman who should never have crossed that line. And while everyone commented, I felt like my life was no longer my own. I'd been ripped from my position as a respected mother and become a character in a story the world loved to tell, but one I never want to live. I'll never forget the sound of her crying that night. It was a deep wail, seemingly coming from the soul, a cry that penetrated walls and hurt me more than any cruel words the city could have said. The bride, her dress still hanging on the chair, sat down next to me in the living room and threw herself into my arms. Why did he do this to me, Donna Maria? What did I do wrong? And I, without an answer, simply enveloped her in a hug that felt more like a plea for forgiveness. Her face was etched with pain. Her eyes were red, her makeup smeared, the bouquet still lying in the corner like a silent witness to the disaster. With each sob, she clung tighter to me, as if I could restore her stolen future. But all I could feel was guilt crushing me, because somehow I knew that, in her eyes, I also bore some of the responsibility. After all, I was his mother, and blood speaks louder. She murmured confused words, sometimes of anger, sometimes of still wounded love. I loved him, and he humiliated me in front of everyone. It was a broken confession, made between sobs. I stroked her hair, trying to calm her, but inside, my own soul screamed. How could I comfort someone when their wound was also mine? How could I erase the abandonment that struck us both, like two victims of the same crime? The following days were even worse. The bride, confined to her room, refused to eat. Her indignant mother would come to visit me and say in a dry tone, "Your son destroyed my daughter's life." I didn't respond because any word would sound like an empty excuse. I just lowered my head, feeling each syllable weigh like a stone. It was true. That girl's life had been tarnished by a cowardly act. Sometimes I'd go into her room with a bowl of soup, begging, "Eat some, my daughter. You need to take care of yourself." But she'd just shake her head, her eyes fixed on nothing. Her wound wasn't in her stomach, it was in her soul. And a soul wound isn't healed with soup. I knew this, but I persisted, because it was the only way to show her what little I still had to offer. The whole town was talking, but no one truly commented on her pain. Everyone was absorbed in the scandal, forgetting that there was a broken young woman, abandoned before the altar. And I, who had previously seen her as a promise of continuity, now saw her as a mirror of my own pain. I knew what it was like to be abandoned, betrayed by life. And perhaps that was why her pain ached within me, as if it were my own. One silent night, she held my hand tightly and said, "I know it's not your fault, but it's hard to look at him and not remember him." Those words were like knives to the chest. I wanted to disappear, to erase myself from the world, because in that moment I was a living reminder of her wound. And yet, I stayed by her side, because a mother doesn't abandon, even when everything tells her to run away. I began to wonder if she would ever be able to rise from that humiliation. The image of her standing at the altar, teary-eyed, wouldn't leave my mind. I knew time is cruel, but I also knew it heals. The problem is that, while the wound is open, each day is a punishment. And she lived that punishment before my eyes. With each visit, with each silent embrace, I felt the bond between us grow strange, heavy. She needed me, but at the same time, I was a reminder of the tragedy. I carried, unwittingly, the face of the man who destroyed her. And as much as she claimed she didn't blame me, her pain silently accused me. And so, my daughter-in-law's wound mingled with mine. Two women united not by love, but by the betrayal of the same man. I as the mother, she as the fiancée. Both victims, both bleeding in silence. And together, we became witnesses to a void that no consolation seemed to fill. After the first few days of silence and tears, anguish gave way to an almost obsessive need. I needed to understand. I needed to know how, when, and why everything happened. It wasn't enough to accept that he had fled. My soul cried out for answers. I began searching every corner of the house, every drawer, every forgotten paper. What had once been home became a search field. And I, like a wounded detective, gathered clues from the rubble of trust. In his room, I found more than just mementos. Inside a box, hidden beneath old clothes, were deposit receipts, contracts, and even bus tickets purchased weeks before the wedding. My heart froze. It hadn't been an impulse. It hadn't been fear of the altar. It was a plan. A cold, calculated plan. My son hadn't just deceived me. He'd prepared for this escape. And with whom? Always with her, the maid. Each piece of paper was a stab in the back. I discovered that part of the inheritance I had saved with such sacrifice had already been moved. Money transferred, accounts emptied. I sat on his bed, documents spread out in my hands, and cried a different kind of cry, not just of pain, but of disbelief. My God, how could he? That boy who promised to take care of me was now dismantling my life with receipts. I stayed up all night, rereading every note, trying to piece together a timeline. I remembered the days when he'd said he was busy with business. I remembered the afternoons when the maid would leave early, claiming to be tired. The pieces fell into place cruelly. And the more I understood, the more the weight of the deception crushed me. I hadn't just lost my son. I'd been made a fool of in my own home. The next morning, I went searching for information. I knocked on doors, asking discreetly. That's how I learned from neighborhood whispers that the two had been seen together long before the scandal. I already suspected Donna Maria, a neighbor said shamelessly. But I didn't want to get involved. Those words pierced me like a blade. How could they have seen and not warned me? How could they have let me live in the dark while everyone else saw the truth? With each story, my soul shattered further. They said they were seen in distant cafes, walking side by side like a couple, that they went in and out of places without caring who was watching. And I, at home, believed the excuses, the justifications, the fake smiles. The feeling of having been deceived was not just due to the betrayal, but also due to the naivete they had forced upon me. I began searching the bank for records. I discovered that signatures had been forged, that authorizations I'd never made were there, recorded. My blood boiled. It was as if the son I'd borne had become my enemy, using my own sweat against me. With each detail revealed, the remaining trust crumbled further. It didn't take long for me to realize he'd taken more than money. He'd taken documents, old family jewelry, priceless mementos. A ring that had belonged to my mother, a silver rosary I'd kept since I was a girl. Everything had disappeared with him. It wasn't just material theft. It was an assault on my history, on my memory. At that moment, I stopped feeling like a betrayed mother and started feeling like an investigator of my own disaster. I searched, asked questions, took notes. My life became reduced to understanding how someone I loved so much could become a stranger. With each clue, the chasm between us widened. I searched for answers, but what I found was a new facet of ingratitude. And so, amidst yellowed papers, neighborly whispers, and sleepless nights, I realized the truth wasn't meant to comfort. It was meant to hurt even more. Because the more I discovered, the more I realized there was no going back. The son I'd raised was gone. What remained was a stranger who plotted my downfall. It was when I opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet, the one I rarely used, that the truth revealed itself. There were the documents I'd guarded like someone protecting an invisible safe. Deeds, receipts, my life savings. And, to my astonishment, many were gone. The emptiness of the drawer seemed to mock me. My heart raced, and my hands shook so badly I had to sit down before I passed out. The bank accounts I'd sworn were untouchable had been emptied. The inheritance I'd accumulated through sweat, nights of work, and years of deprivation had simply vanished. Everything I'd saved to ensure a peaceful future was now in his hands and hers. It wasn't just an escape, it was premeditated theft. I didn't know whether to cry for the betrayal or for the emptiness that now inhabited my life. I remembered the times he'd ask me for money in a soft voice, saying it was to invest in the future. And I, trusting as only a mother can, handed it over. Each bill that left my hands now felt like a piece of me ripped away. How blind was I? I repeated silently. I, who had always worked hard, had been deceived by my own blood. There is no greater pain than this. The family jewels were also gone. My mother's engagement ring, which I kept in a velvet box, was gone. My father's antique watch, which I swore I would one day pass down to my son, was also gone. It was as if he had ripped away not only my present, but my past as well. Nothing remained but shattered memories. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the dim light from the lamp illuminating the scattered papers. I did the math one by one. The sheer value of the stolen inheritance nearly took my breath away. It wasn't just money. It was my entire life translated into numbers. Each figure was a sacrifice. The dress I never bought, the trip I never took, the dreams I'd put aside to raise my son. And now all of it was gone, lost in ungrateful hands. I felt a revolt rise within me, a fury I barely recognized. How could he? How could someone who had received so much love turn his own mother into a victim? I walked through the house with heavy steps, looking at every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall, wondering if all of that would one day be taken away too. I no longer felt like I owned even my own story. The neighbors, of course, were quick to comment. He took everything from his mother, they whispered. I saw their stares, full of curiosity and judgment. It was as if my pain had become a spectacle, and I, ashamed, hid inside the house, trying to cope with the hole that was growing not only in my drawers, but also in my soul. The bride, upon learning of the stolen inheritance, burst into tears again. So, he never loved me. He just wanted to take advantage. Her pain compounded mine, and together we seemed like two women torn apart by the same man. She by the illusion of love, I by the illusion of trust. It was as if we were trapped in the same boat, adrift, rudderless, surrounded by a sea of ingratitude. I spent nights rethinking every decision. If only I had kept the money elsewhere, if only I had been wary of the stairs, if only I had been less blind. But it was no use. The if brought nothing back. All that was left was to accept that my inheritance, my legacy, had been ripped from me by the hands of the one I loved most. The wound was so deep it seemed impossible to heal. And there, faced with the emptiness of the drawers and the absence that echoed in every corner of the house, I understood that there was no greater loss than this. I had lost my son, lost my future, lost the security I had spent a lifetime building. The stolen inheritance wasn't just material, it was a symbol of how much I had deceived myself. And the worst was yet to come, because that discovery was only the beginning of a pain that would continue to unfold. It was during this whirlwind of loss that I began to mentally revisit every detail of her presence in my home. The maid, the young woman I had welcomed almost as a daughter, had always seemed humble, grateful, almost too docile. But now, looking back, her every simple gesture took on a new meaning. I wondered, had it all been staged? Had she planned this outcome from the beginning? I remembered the first time she walked through the door, modestly dressed, with a downcast look, the rehearsed words of someone in need of help. I just want a chance, Donna Maria, she said, her voice almost breaking. And I, with the soft heart I've always had, opened not only the door to her home, but also the door of trust. I believed in the need I saw in her eyes. Today I wonder if it wasn't precisely this apparent vulnerability that blinded me. Over time, I realized she adapted too quickly. She knew how to cook, clean, and tidy up the house as if she'd always been there. What's more, she easily earned smiles from my son. At first, I thought it was funny. Look, even the maid likes his jokes. But now, looking back, I see they were laughs of complicity, not innocent sympathy. And I was blind, thinking it was just domestic harmony. There was an episode that came back to me forcefully. One time, I found her rummaging through my jewelry drawer. I asked her what she was doing there. She quickly replied that she was looking for thread and a needle to sew a trouser hem. The excuse seemed convincing, and I thought nothing more about it. Now, every memory like that weighs heavily as proof of what I refused to see. It was a clear sign that ambition already lived within her. The neighbors, upon hearing of the escape, were quick to start swearing. That girl always had eyes bigger than her plate. I'm not surprised, Donna Maria. She never settled for being just a maid. The words echoed, cruel, but loaded with truth I didn't want to see. Her ambition wasn't new. She already carried in her eyes the hunger to climb, to have what wasn't hers. I also remember the way she observed me. Sometimes I found that long gaze strange, as if measuring not only the house but also its owner. Perhaps, from the beginning, she saw me as a ladder. Every smile, every gesture of care, could have been just a step towards something greater. And I, innocent, believed I was giving affection when in fact I was feeding greed. Even her way of speaking had changed. At first, her voice was low, shy, almost silent. Over time, she grew more confident, responding as an equal. I even admired the change, thinking it was a confidence gained through familiarity. Today, I understand it was growing boldness disguised as confidence. The stage was already set for the final blow. The penny dropped when I found an old photo of her, tucked away among the remaining papers. She wasn't the humble girl I knew, but a well-dressed young woman, partying, surrounded by influential people. Her past wasn't as necessary as she made it seem. The humility that moved me might have been nothing more than an act. A well-calculated mask to get in where you wanted. And that's how I realized the maid wasn't just an accomplice to the escape. She was a key player in the entire trap. She didn't fall prey to fate. She walked through the right door at the right time and knew how to exploit my every weakness and his every weakness. It was as if her entire life had been a preparation for this scam. And I, generous and trusting, was the perfect victim. Now, when I think of her, I don't just feel anger. I feel indignation with myself. Because if I had paid attention to the signs, perhaps I could have avoided it. But the truth is, by opening my home, I handed over the keys to my own ruin. And the maid's past, once a mystery, now shows me that nothing I experienced with her was real. It was all a performance by a woman who knew exactly what she wanted, and who took what was mine with her. When the dust began to settle, the greatest enemy remaining within me wasn't the city, nor the wounded bride, nor even the traitorous maid. It was my own conscience. I lay awake at night, tossing and turning, repeating the same question like a rosary of pain. Where did I go wrong? The weight of guilt crushed me more than any external judgment. After all, I was a mother. I raised him. And if he chose this path, wasn't the fault in me? I remembered the times I'd given in too much. When I saw him cry, I softened. When I made a mistake, I forgave too quickly. Had I been too permissive? Had I turned love into indulgence and indulgence into weakness? Every memory of his childhood came back to me as an accusation. I punished myself, reviewing every choice I'd made as a mother, every no I hadn't had the courage to say. Other times, the guilt came in the opposite direction. Maybe I'd been too harsh. Maybe the weight of being both a mother and a father had turned me into a suffocating, authoritarian figure. Maybe he'd run away not only with the maid, but also from me, from my constant shadow. These thoughts gnawed at me because in any scenario, I was guilty. It felt like there was no escape. I walked through the house and felt his presence in every corner. His favorite mug still on the shelf, the distant scent of perfume in the cupboard, a photograph of him smiling still hanging on the wall. I looked at that smile frozen in time and asked, "Who are you? Where did I lose you?" And the walls, silent, didn't answer. But the echo of guilt filled the entire space. I often found myself in front of the mirror, staring at my own reflection. I, with gray hair and tired eyes, would ask quietly, "Did you never really know your son?" This question lingered day and night, because perhaps I created an idealized version of him, a son shaped by my hope, and never saw the real man inside. The neighbors, even unintentionally, reinforced this wound. "A mother knows things," they said. "A mother feels." And I cringed at these phrases. Because if every mother feels, why didn't I feel? If every mother knows, why didn't I know? Maybe I chose to close my eyes. Maybe I preferred to believe in the illusion rather than face the truth. This was the worst kind of guilt, having been blind by choice. The bride, even in her grief, tried to comfort me. "It's not your fault, Donna Maria. He deceived us all." But I couldn't believe it. Her words, though kind, didn't erase the feeling that I should have done more, seen more, prevented more. A mother's guilt doesn't listen to reason. It's deaf to any justification. It only repeats, You failed. Sometimes I dreamed of him as a boy. I saw him running around the yard, bringing me flowers plucked from the sidewalk as gifts. I would wake up crying, my heart aching, and the guilt would crush me even more. How had that sweet boy become a man capable of stealing, betraying, and humiliating? Where had the tenderness gone? And was it me who let it slip away? I began to carry this guilt like a cross, an invisible weight, but one that bowed me before the world. I no longer walked with my head held high. My slumped shoulders betrayed my shame. Inside me, a voice insisted, "You lost him because you didn't know how to be a mother." And no matter how hard I tried to push that thought away, it always returned, like a shadow clinging to my body. And it was in this whirlwind of internal accusations that I realized the pain of betrayal was already immense, but the mother's guilt was even more cruel. Because there is no harsher tribunal than the heart of a mother who believes she has failed. And this internal judgment has no easy absolution. Over time, I realized it wasn't just the pain of betrayal that crushed me, but also my wounded pride. My ego, that invisible companion that had so often sustained me, now threw me to the ground. I, who had always prided myself on being strong, on having raised my son alone, on having built a dignified life, now found myself naked before everyone. The entire town knew, and my ego, once so proud, bled in silence. I remembered the times I'd firmly say, "My son is my victory." How many times had I repeated that phrase, almost like a trophy held aloft before the world? Now, each word came back to me as a cruel irony. The son I'd held up as a symbol of my strength was the very one exposing me to the greatest humiliation. My ego, which had once given me courage, now took a heavy toll on me for every public statement I made. A mother's pride is sweet, but also dangerous. It made me believe I had won, that my struggle had been worth it, that fate would not be unfair to me. But ego is also blinding. It doesn't let us see the cracks, preferring to display the facade. And I, overcome by pride, ignored the signs that were right in front of me. The weight of my ego dragged me down, cruelly reminding me that vanity always exacts its price. On the streets, the looks were twofold. Some viewed me with pity, others with disdain. And my wounded ego wouldn't accept either. I didn't want to be pitied, but I also couldn't bear being the object of contempt. I felt trapped, unsure how to present myself to the world. As the betrayed mother? As the deceived wife? As the victim or as the guilty one? In either role, my ego contorted, unable to accept this new identity. Sometimes, on long nights, I would find myself whispering to God, "Did I sin through pride? Did I trust myself too much, thinking I could control fate?" These questions gnawed at me, because perhaps that was precisely it, the ego of believing that because I had done so much, life owed me happiness. But life owes nothing to anyone. And this lesson came now, bitter, belated. I also remembered how many times I ignored advice. Don't trust so much. Don't be fooled by appearances. I listened, but my ego told me, "You know what you're doing." I believed that arrogant voice, as if it were infallible. Today, I recognize that this excessive confidence wasn't faith, it was vanity in disguise. And it was in this excess that I let the enemy in through the front door. My ego also made me struggle with shame, trying in vain to save my image. I made excuses for some, looked away from others, and feigned normalcy at home. But every gesture was empty theater. The truth is, my ego no longer had a stage. The audience had seen its downfall, and there was no curtain to hide it. The bride, in her grief, seemed more humble than I. She wept openly, confessed her hurt, and didn't care about appearing fragile. I didn't. I tried to stand up straight, as if that gave me some dignity. But inside, my wounded ego weighed more heavily than the betrayal itself. And silently, I wondered, would it have hurt less if I hadn't been so proud before? Over time, I began to realize that my ego wasn't just a burden, it was also a prison. It prevented me from crying in public, from asking for help, from admitting my vulnerability. And while I kept quiet to save face, the pain grew, corrosive, finding no escape. The weight of my ego wouldn't let me heal. And so, I began to understand that the ego, which had so often sustained me, was now also what was sinking me. Because the greatest shame wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the public downfall of the image I'd created for myself. And perhaps, to move forward, I needed to let that ego die. But how do you kill something that's been a part of me my entire life? When everything calmed down outside, the only sound left was the silence within the walls. The house, once alive with voices, laughter, and hurried footsteps, became a desert of memories. Every piece of furniture seemed to carry a ghost. The kitchen chair, where he'd sit to tell childhood stories. The sofa, which bore the marks of quick naps after work. Even the sound of the door slamming, which always irritated me, was now missed. The emptiness held weight. I would wake up in the middle of the night and walk the halls as if searching for someone. I would touch the cold walls, stop in front of his room, and listen to nothing. I opened the closet once, just to smell the stored clothes. The perfume was still there, saturated in the fabric. It broke me again. I closed it quickly, as if closing the memory with it, but it was useless. The scent stayed with me, accompanying me even in my sleep. The living room clock became an enemy. Its constant ticking reminded me that time was passing, but the pain wasn't. Before, the hours flew by between household chores. Now each minute dragged on, stretched out in painful silence. The house seemed to swallow me whole. The kitchen, once the heart of the home, was now a stage for solitude. Making coffee for one person was a cruel exercise. The sound of the kettle sounded like irony. Visitors became fewer. At first, many came, curious. Then, when there was no more news, everyone went back to their lives. Only me, the walls, and solitude remained. The phone, which had previously rang nonstop, now fell silent. And when it did, I answered it with trepidation. It was either another cruel comment or the awkward silence of someone unsure of what to say. Little by little, I withdrew from the world, closing the curtains, avoiding glances. Even small objects became painful memories. The mug with the chipped rim, the pair of sneakers forgotten in the corner, the towel he'd been wearing thrown over the chair. They were simple things, but now they silently screamed. He was here. I wanted to throw them away, but I couldn't. It was as if each piece were an anchor to a time that would never return. The maid also left her traces. The apron still hanging behind the door, the sewing box forgotten on the shelf. I avoided looking, but inevitably I saw it. And each time I saw it, the wound reopened. It was as if the entire house were a silent witness to the crime committed against me. There was no safe place. There was no corner where loneliness wouldn't lie beside me. The nights were the worst. The wind blowing through the cracks in the window, the creaking of the wood, the distant groan of the gate. Every sound became a memory. I would sit in the armchair, staring at the door, almost expecting him to burst in, smiling and saying, "Mom, I'm back." But the door remained closed, and I, alone, had to face the truth. He wasn't coming back. The silence made me talk to myself, sometimes out loud, as if trying to break the void. I recalled stories from his childhood, repeated advice I'd given, spoke as if he could hear. But the answer never came. The echo of my own voice was the only company. It was a one-person dialogue, a fragile solace for a bone-aching loneliness. The house, once a shelter, now felt like a jailer. The walls, once protective, became accusatory. I felt judged by the space I had built with so much effort. It was as if the house itself was asking, was it worth it? All the sacrifice, all the struggle, to end up like this alone. These questions had no answer. They only deepened the loneliness. And it was in this silence that I realized that pain lies not only in the person's absence, but in the excessive memories they leave behind. The loneliness of the house wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It was as if every corner had been taken over by an invisible ghost. And I, powerless, simply lived with them, hoping that one day time would have the courage to sweep away this emptiness. It wasn't long before my solitude was invaded by the cruelest voice of all, that of the people. In the small town, every corner is a courtroom, every mouth a sentence. I didn't need to leave the house to hear it. The wind carried the words to me, as if mocking. Donna Maria's son ran off with the maid. He took everything she had. I listened even when I didn't want to. The words flowed freely, alive, fueled by the malice that never sleeps. Whenever I ventured to the bakery, I felt eyes on me, some filled with curiosity, others with false compassion. It was a heavy silence, interrupted by whispers as soon as I turned my back. I walked with my head held high, trying to display dignity, but inside I felt stripped bare, stripped of all honor. The collective judgment weighed more heavily than stone, and I carried that weight every day. Some approached with false solidarity. Stay strong, Donna Maria. God knows what he's doing. These phrases, which were supposed to comfort, only hurt more. They were spoken with that pious tone that hid the gossip hidden on the tip of their tongues. Because I knew the person who hugged me on the street was the same person who was making comments on the corner. And this duplicity ate away at me. People have two faces, and I had seen them both. The church, which had always been my refuge, also became a stage for whispers. I felt the stares during Mass, the hushed whispers behind the pews. How could a son do this to his own mother? I cringed, trying to concentrate on my prayers, but every word felt like an accusation. Even my faith wavered, because it seemed God, too, was silent in the face of my shame. At the market, conversations would stop when I entered, but laughter would return as soon as I passed. I heard fragments: theft, betrayal, shame. Scattered words that cut deeper than knives. And, silently, I walked on, pretending not to hear. But inside, each sentence lodged itself like a thorn. The voice of the people doesn't need to be loud to be deadly. It just needs to be constant. There were even those who invented stories that never happened. She knew everything. Her mother was an accomplice. When I first heard this, I nearly lost my footing. It wasn't enough to be a victim. Now I was also accused. The people's wickedness knows no bounds. They turned my pain into a spectacle and my name into headlines. I, who never sought the stage, was thrust into the spotlight. The children on the street, unfiltered, repeated what they heard at home. One of them shouted, "Donna Maria, where's your thieving son?" It was like a punch. I didn't cry in front of them, but when I got home, I broke down. It was cruel to see innocence tainted by the venom of adults. Even the small voices echoed the sentence. I had no defense, no respite. The worst part was that, in the midst of all this, I myself began to believe what they said. When you hear the same phrase over and over, it becomes true within you. I began to think, maybe I really was to blame. Maybe I failed so badly that I caused all this. The voices of the people mingled with my own inner voice, and together they formed a deafening chorus. At night, when the silence seemed to give me rest, I still listened. I don't know if it was imagination or memory, but I seemed to hear whispers through the cracks in the window. The betrayed mother, the destroyed family, the voices of the people even entered my dreams. She woke frightened, with the feeling of being watched. And in a way, she was. In a small town, no one escapes collective judgment. And that's how I realized that pain isn't limited to what we experience at home. It grows when it reaches the public's lips. The betrayal had already torn me apart inside, but the voice of the people tore me apart from the outside, exposing my wounds as if they were a spectacle. I no longer had the right to silence. My pain was public, commented on, dissected, as if it were everyone's property. And this was a wound that hurt as much as the first. After so much crying, so much silence, and so much shame, there came a moment when I realized that if I didn't get up, I would die in life. It wasn't overnight. It was a slow, painful awakening, like someone crawling in the dark in search of a ray of light. I looked in the mirror, my eyes sunken, my skin tired, and thought, if I keep blaming myself, they'll win twice over, my son and the people. It was then that I decided I wouldn't give up my life to abandonment. The first attempt at overcoming grief came in small gestures. I tidied the house again, removed the dried flowers, washed the stored clothes, and donated what weighed too heavily as a memory. Each object removed was a piece of pain I pushed out. The maid had left traces everywhere, but I began to erase them, one by one. It was like sweeping away the dust from a fire. It didn't extinguish the destruction, but it allowed me to breathe. I also started walking in the morning, even if people stared. The cold wind on my face reminded me that I was still alive. The sun, though shy, warmed my shoulders like a hug. I walked slowly, with firm steps, as if rebuilding my dignity at every turn. At first, it hurt to face the stairs, but then I realized that each step was a challenge overcome. The world could judge me, but it couldn't stop me from existing. The bride, still hurt, was another reason for me to rise again. I saw in that girl the continuation of my own pain, and I understood that I needed to be strong not only for myself, but also for her. I brought you soup, listened to your outbursts, shared my tears. Little by little, our wounds began to mend. I discovered that when two women trust their pain, they create an invisible strength that no one understands, but that sustains. I also started going to church again, even under the whispers. And it was there, amidst prayers and songs, that I felt something different. It was no longer the haughty faith of before, of someone who believed the world owed them a reward. It was a humble faith, devoid of vanity. I prayed not for everything to return, but for the strength to endure what was no longer returnable. This change was the beginning of my overcoming. I realized that carrying a grudge was poison. For a long time, I longed for revenge, for him to suffer, for her to pay, for the people to be silent. But I realized that this desire kept me trapped in the same abyss. Little by little, I let go. It doesn't mean I've forgiven. I still don't know if I can. But I decided not to let resentment be the chain around my neck. The greatest revenge against those who hurt us is to stay standing. The nights were still long, but I learned to fill them with good memories. I remembered the boy who ran around the yard, the flowers plucked to give me as gifts, the small victories we achieved together. I didn't deny the pain, but I also didn't let it erase everything. I discovered that overcoming isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live with what was without letting it destroy me. Over time, I realized that my story could serve as a warning to others. I began talking more, sharing my experience, and opening my heart without shame. I saw that other mothers also carried guilt and wounds. And in sharing, I found purpose. Pain, when shared, loses some of its weight. I was no longer just a victim. I was a witness. The strength to overcome didn't come like a flash of lightning. It came like an insistent breeze. Small, constant, almost imperceptible. But little by little, it swept away the weight of my ego, my shame, and my loneliness. I discovered that I could still start over, even without the inheritance, even without my son, even without the life I dreamed of. I was still alive, and as long as I had breath, there was a chance to rise. And so, from the depths of my pit, I began to see that pain wasn't the end. It was just a chapter in my story. The strength I thought I lacked was born the moment I accepted that I couldn't change what happened, but I could decide how to move forward. And, between falls and timid steps, I chose not to be remembered as the broken woman, but as the woman who, even wounded, found the strength to rise. Over time, I realized that my story wouldn't end in tragedy, but it wouldn't be erased either. The pain I experienced became part of me, a scar that doesn't disappear but teaches. I came to understand that the true legacy I carry isn't just what I built with wealth or sacrifice, but also what I learned through suffering. Abandonment, betrayal, public shame, all of it, however cruel, became testimony. I, who always believed that inheritance was made of objects and money, discovered that there are much deeper legacies, the lessons that remain, even when everything is taken from us. Pain, when faced, shapes the soul. It teaches us to see clearly, to distrust what shines too brightly, to not give our hearts away blindly. It was a bitter learning experience, but today I know that my pain is also my teacher. Looking back, I see that I'm not the same woman who walked smiling into the hall on her wedding day. That woman died there, amid white flowers and astonished looks. The one born later is tougher, more attentive, but also wiser. The legacy of pain made me abandon illusions and embrace reality as it is, stark and raw. Because only then can we free ourselves, by facing life's revelations without veils. People still talk, it's true. But today I don't care so much. Because I've understood that the voice of the people doesn't define who I am. What defines me is how I survived what seemed unbearable. If before I bowed before judgment, today I rise before it. I've learned that, in the end, I'm the one experiencing the pain, not the one commenting. And no one can take that away. The bride, in time, also found her way. I saw in her eyes a strength similar to my own, that of someone who has fallen but chosen not to remain down.
This comforted me.
Perhaps this is the true legacy of pain, the ability to transform despair into resilience, tears into courage. Life doesn't ask us if we're ready. It simply tests us. And we choose whether to fall for good or to carry on, even if we limp. Sometimes I think about my son. I wonder if one day he'll regret it, if he'll look back and see the destruction he left behind. I don't know if there will be a return. I don't know if there will be forgiveness. But I know that, even without him, I'm still alive. And that the love I felt wasn't lost. It became a lesson learned. The legacy of pain is also this: recycling feelings so as not to die with them inside us. Today, when I walk the streets, I still hear whispers, but I no longer feel the stones weigh so heavily. My heart, even scarred, found a way to beat without so much despair. I learned that pain doesn't kill us when we transform it into a story. And that's what I do now. I tell, I record, I share. Because perhaps my voice will help another mother, another woman, another heart not feel alone in their tragedy. The silence of the house remains, but it's no longer just emptiness. Now it's a space for reflection. Every corner holds memories, but also lessons. I talk to these walls, and they restore my certainty that I survived. Yes, I was betrayed. Yes, I was robbed, but not destroyed. The legacy of pain is precisely this: proof that, no matter how much they try to rip everything from us, something always remains, and that something is the strength to carry on. And so I carry on, my scars exposed, without trying to hide them, because I've learned there's no shame in having been hurt. The shame lies in denying one's own story. I accept mine, however bitter, and make it my testimony. The pain has changed me, but it has also given me a voice. And that voice can no longer be silenced. Today I tell my story not to seek pity, but to deliver a warning. Ingratitude hurts more than death, and betrayal from those we love can shatter us. But if there's one thing time has taught me, it's that, even when broken, we can still rebuild. The legacy of pain is living proof that, even in ruins, there is still life. And as long as there is life, there is a way. Today, as I tell my story, I no longer speak with the trembling voice of a victim, but with the firmness of someone who has survived the impossible. I have learned that the greatest betrayal is not the one others inflict on us, but the one we allow when we allow pain to silence us. I did not remain silent. I transformed each tear into a word, each wound into a visible scar, so that no one can be mistaken. Ingratitude can wound deeper than death. I ask you, whoever is listening, how far would you go to protect your family? What if it was the very person you loved most who turned their back on you? How many times have you trusted blindly and been stabbed? These questions don't have easy answers, but they carry within them the reminder that we are all subject to falls, and that what defines us is not the fall, but how we get back up. My house still echoes with silence, but today that silence no longer frightens me. It reminds me that I survived. I lost money, I lost confidence, I even lost the son I bore, but I didn't lose the ability to carry on. And that's what I leave as my legacy. The certainty that, even in ruins, it's still possible to rise. If my story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Reflect on your life, on your choices, on who truly deserves your love and trust. Because, in the end, what saves us is not what we have, but the strength to carry on when everything is taken away. And if you've made it this far, I ask you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. This way, more people will have access to stories that make us think, that shake us, that remind us that life can be cruel, but it can also teach us to be stronger.